Let's roll into another one. I'm not podcasting. BMI and ASCAP. They're the big music licensors. They want to reform regulation, while the radio industry moans about fractional licensing again. So there was a 2-day online extravaganza recently by Leanne Rimes and Pharrell Williams. They headlined the event. It was staged by the Funsters at the United States Department of Justice, entertaining the world by discussing the intricacies of collecting society regulation and the current review of the BMI and ASCAP consent decrees. The licensors and licensees of songs stateside lined up to deliver pretty familiar arguments as to why BMI and ASCAP need to be rigorously regulated on every level possible to ensure the continued existence of human civilization itself. Here's the thing. So the Music Modernization Act and then the impending thought of the AM/FM Act. These are two acts to help get music artists royalties. Well, the Music Modernization Act actually affected the streaming services like Spotify, Pandora, Apple, and others, so that music that was done before 1972 and other artists were able to get their proper royalties, which was a big move, a bipartisan move, as a matter of fact. Well, now the same thing needs to happen for radio. There's been talk about the local radio rule, about how music needs to be paid for, that, radio stations do not pay enough for the music that they put on the air to go ahead and monetize for themselves. Meanwhile, the streaming services might be monetizing subscriptions. The radio stations are monetizing solely on advertising. So the boss of the National Association of Broadcasters said, quote, "Without the framework, the current consent decrees provide a fair competitive market for the licensing of musical works simply would not exist." And the chiefs of BMI and ASCAP said a free market for music rights cut free from this consent decree regulation would create a more productive, efficient, and level playing field for everyone. Collective licensing is where large groups of music makers and music rights holders license together through collecting societies. Always creates competition law concerns. Even the licensees benefit from the approach as much as the music community. So the consent decrees, which were BMI and ASCAP, they were reached with the Department of Justice all the way back in the 1940s. And there's been pretty tough regulation of BMI and ASCAP's operations, even though, unlike in many other countries, there is already more competition in the marketplace. There are multiple societies of all representing the performing rights of songwriters in the U.S., with smaller organizations like CSAC and GMR, as well as BMI and ASCAP. Unlike in other markets, societies don't have any exclusive rights over their members' work, so licensees can always try and negotiate direct deals with publishers and writers that cuts the societies out. Add to that, the music marketplace for rights has changed over the last 80 years, especially the last 2 decades, and the U.S. music industry argues there's a strong case for having BMI and ASCAP consent decrees radically overhauled and axed altogether. A failure to reform, the industry would argue, has had a negative impact on a song's business because of the copyrights of songwriters and music publishers, repeatedly undervalued whenever the regulations kick in. Then there's technology, which has altered daily lives. It has certainly transformed the way music is created, consumed, and tracked. There needs to be an evolution with those changes and adapt practices to meet the needs of those that have been entrusted to serve: songwriters, composers, and publishers. So right now, the Department of Justice is in a big review of the BMI and ASCAP consent decrees, even though a previous review 4 years ago concluded everything was fine and nothing should change. But different story. And now we're at this point. NAB CEO Gordon Smith noted how the consent decrees had been reviewed and approved in his presentation of yesterday's hearing, which was only a couple days ago as we recorded this. For broadcasters and many other licensees, the endeavor raises major concerns. BMI and ASCAP's rules say that when there's a case of fractional licensing, okay, there's a thought where BMI and ASCAP can offer licensees so-called fractional licensees to do with the fact that song copyrights are frequently co-owned, meaning that a BMI or ASCAP member may only control a portion of any one work. The single biggest change to the consent decree landscape in the last few decades is the federal court's recent mistaken interpretation that the decrees do not require full work licensing. Following the court's ruling of question of fractional licensing, licensees may very well pay ASCAP pay ASCAP or BMI for the right to publicly perform works, but actually have no right to use them. Any discussion or modifying the decrees must start with requiring whole work licensing. Then there's the partial withdrawal of rights for members to opt out of licenses while staying in others. So writers and publishers could choose not to participate in the streaming deals, but still be a part of the radio and concert licenses. So the thing is, there's not enough money being collected. And the way they're being collected, it's a big pot, and then royalties only come out so much to the artists. And again, singers, songwriters, publishers. And that's the point. They're looking for more money. That's the whole point of this here. And I can understand where they're coming from. So the discussion's being made. Department of Justice needs to go and make a change about this. Could they outlaw BMI and ASCAP? Because those kind of organizations go away. And if it does, if they think it's no good anymore, then what happens? Think about this. Could we very well see something that happens where radio stations, they won't have to fend for themselves. The big corporate radio giants, they would have to pay a much bigger price, a price they could not afford. So what would happen then? What would they do then? Would they stop playing music altogether? What would happen to radio stations if they lost this sweetheart deal of having a BMI ASCAP to work off of that only charge an annual fee altogether? And that's it. You know, I can understand trying to get more royalties and more money for the musicians and the songwriters and publishers, especially now with a pandemic where there's less pipelines to monetize for themselves. So I can understand where they're coming from. It's not an easy decision, but they have to figure out what they're going to do next. I'm going to leave it there. Talk to you next time.